Terrence County, born and raised, proudly. A nice home high up in the mountains where you could look down upon the world, not given much of a single care in the world. With a sort of description like that, you would think that there'd be nothing to really complain about, would there? For the most part, you'd of course be right. My life was a nice and happy one through and through up until that point. But happy life or not, no one's without at least one ghost story or one traumatic event that ends up sticking with them for the rest of their lives, right? For me, it was when I was well into young adulthood. I hadn't moved out of my house yet, given that I was working a part-time job as a grocer, while also going to community college. Believe it or not, it wasn't a bad job for what it was, and it allowed me to kick enough each month to Mom and Dad for rent to keep them off my back while not putting me in the hole. The people had a lick of sense, and for the most part, people seemed to like me. One night though, I found the case to be very different. One night I was just trying to work as usual. It was about 2.5 hours from closing time, and I found that this one guy kept coming in the store. Now, it wasn't entirely uncommon for something like this to happen. It's no exaggeration to say that for the most part, the place was basically dependent on repeat customers. Thing was, I at least knew said repeat customers. This guy, however, I didn't know. The second thing out of sorts here was the fact that this guy also didn't actually buy anything. Finally, the biggest mark of all, though, was the fact that I couldn't see the guy's face. He wore a hood and hat with shades that pretty much concealed the majority of his face from view. That alone was enough to get him looked at suspiciously, not to mention being approached by employees and told to please remove the hood. But everyone else, all 2 other people there with me that night, I guess were too busy to notice or say anything to him about it. Fortunately, at the front counter where I was, there was little to no business, so I decided to go and say something to the guy. I approached him in the electronics aisle and asked, "Hey there, sir, is there anything that I can help you with?" He snapped his head to look at me like a deer in headlights. I cleared my throat and repeated the question. He exchanged a glance back and forth between me and the shelf in front of him. He then lowered his head and walked away. "Hey, wait," I exclaimed, running to catch up with him. He kept walking, and I was about to radio to one of the others that he was heading towards the pet aisle when I found that he wasn't there anymore. I looked to my right and left, down the chemical and pharmaceutical aisles to see if he was in either of those and if I had just missed him. He wasn't. I then ran to see if how he had beat me to the pet aisle, but nope, nothing, he wasn't there either. Where did he go? I started throwing my head around frantically. Where was he? He was right there, wasn't he? What happened? I was snapped back to attention when I felt a hand on my shoulder, causing me to whirl around and almost backhand my coworker in the face. "Whoa, Christy, switch to decaf, please." I let out a sigh. "Oh, Jesus, Frank, I'm sorry, He held up his hand. "Look, forget about it. Who the heck's watching the register?" "Oh, yeah, I'm on it." I turned and then hurried back to the front counter. When I got back to the front, I did my best to try and forget about the whole thing. It was nothing, just a 1 in a million fluke that some guy kept coming in and out, and then he was gone in an instant. That is, until I saw him again. He was walking through the front door like he had the past several times that day. He walked again towards electronics, where I followed him. "Sir," I called out, and just like last time, he looked at me and bolted for the pet aisle. I followed him again, only to again lose him in chemicals and pharmaceuticals. This time, I spent a good 10 or so minutes trying to search for him, before I was once again approached from behind by Frank. This time, though, I noticed something else. Frank asked me who was watching the front of the store again, like he had the first time. I was about to turn and head back again when I noticed this. "Hey, didn't you say that last time?" I asked him, and he cocked his eyebrows at me. Last time, he asked. What are you talking about? Just a moment ago, didn't you tell me to head back to the front? He looked down for a moment before shaking his head at me. Oh, okay. Well, what about the guy in the hoodie? Did you see him? He shook his head again. Christy, I seriously think you need to switch to decaf, I asked, cutting him off. His eyebrow raised further. Yeah, how did you? 'Cause you said that too. For a moment, the two of us just looked dumbfounded at each other before he turned and walked away. I stood for a moment, too confused. The way that my head spun, I'm almost surprised that it didn't detach itself from my head and start flying around like a helicopter. I did see that, right? That guy was there both before and now, wasn't he? And why did Frank repeat himself? Does he know that he did? How come that he didn't see the guy? I turned and was about to head back for the third time when a thought had occurred to me. I realized that the emergency back door was located just past the pet food aisle. I realized that he must have been using that to run out, to circle around and then come back inside. I figured that he must be using that door to sneak out however much of the store's merchandise by that point, and coming back in to grab more. With this in mind, I ran through and I looked out the door. The parking lot back there was empty. I looked around, using my phone as a flashlight to see if he was lingering around. And before you say anything, yes, I realized that what I was doing was dangerous. Checking out the back area alone in the middle of the night. Again though, it was normally a safe area to be in, where stuff like that usually wasn't a huge concern. Plus I always did carry my butterfly knife on me in case I needed to use a blade to open packaging on one of the products. They don't supply us with box cutters for some reason. In any event, neither he nor anybody else was anywhere around. Figuring that I'd already missed him and that he had likely already made it back around to the front, I turned and ran back to the register. And sure enough, I was right. I made it back in time to catch him in the electronics department again. I was about to confront him when I had stopped, opting instead to observe him at first. I figured that I could catch him in the act first, you know. Well, I watched him for at least 10 minutes and didn't see him stealing anything. In fact, I didn't see him doing anything either. Just standing there, shaking and looking around like an idiot. Finally, I decided to walk up. As I did so, I quietly radioed to Frank for backup. "Be right there," said Frank's voice over the radio, a little bit too loud. Unfortunately, this ended up giving my position away and he looked over to me again, spooked before turning and booking it. "Oh no, you don't." In an instant, I watched him dart past the chemical and pharmacy aisles again, before losing sight of him. Maybe losing sight of him isn't the right word here. It might be more accurate to say that he just up and vanished. As in one instant, not a second, an instant. He was right there in front of me, maybe just a foot or two ahead of me in the next. He wasn't anymore. And keep in mind that he had at least another 3 feet to go before he could have reached the door. How the heck then did he keep getting outside? And not only that, why did he keep running away from me every time he saw me if he wasn't stealing anything? Was he some sort of wanted man? Okay, yeah, that might explain his apparent need to cover his face. But that still didn't explain why he kept coming into the store, or how he was doing it either. I mean, we had cameras and he did know that, right? If he was on the run, he was essentially shooting himself in the foot by continuing to come into the store, wasn't he? Face covering or no, he was still there. At least I thought he was. And he was still continuing to come in and out, even using the same exact route through the store each time. I mean, who is this guy and what's his deal? I was broken from my thoughts again by Frank, placing his head on my shoulder. I whirled around and reared back again. "Whoa, Christy, switch to decaf." The words honestly jumped from my mouth before I even realized it. A sort of knee-jerk reaction almost. Frank stared back at me, shocked. Yeah, I guess. Hey, wait, who's?" Watching the front, his eyes widened. That's when I realized that something was very wrong here. I was dead on the money again. For the third time in a row, I had predicted what he was going to say and when. Not only that, it was in the exact same spot as the last 2 times before. What in the heck is this? Frank was turning to head back into the office when I stopped him. Wait. Huh? He asked, turning back around. Listen, have you noticed anything, off lately? His eyes glanced around for a moment before pursing his lips and shaking his head. Not really, he replied. Well, outside of you abandoning the register when we still have another. He paused and looked at his watch. 2 hours before we close up for the night. I'm sorry, I've been having to. I stopped then, a realization washing over me. Hold on a second. Did you just say that we still had another 2 hours before closing? Yeah, why? His eyes were bugged out at me with his eyebrows raised. Show me. Hesitantly, he rotated his wrist to show me his watch. And sure enough, he was right. It was only 8:15. The same time that it was when I first started to chase the guy. Now I was alarmed. How had no time passed? The 3 times alone I wasted trying to catch the idiot should have at least burned through another 30 or maybe 45 minutes. Yet not a single minute had passed apparently. I was speechless, staring dull-eyed in horror at Frank's watch. Frank must have seen the color draining from my face because the next thing that he asked me was if I was feeling ill. I almost said yes, truth be told. Instead, I looked up to him and replied that I was fine. Listen, do you think you would let me take a look at the cameras? He stared quizzically at me. I'll explain it in the office, just please. Sure, yeah, I guess. He tapped the button on his walkie and asked the other associate, Harold, if he would come up to the register while he and I were in the office. Harold replied, albeit not at all enthusiastically, that he would, and I followed Frank into the office. Frank closed the door behind us and began pulling up the CCTV footage. For about 15 minutes, Frank had scrolled through the hours of footage until I stopped him where I had seen the guy walking in. There, I exclaimed, pointing at the screen. Frank froze the footage where the guy walked in. That guy's been in and out of here several times now. I had him rewind the footage to prove my point. Huh? He said. You see it too, right? Yeah, what the heck? How come you didn't say anything to him, especially with the hood on? I did, Frank. 3 times, and every time he took off and vanished. Watch. I took the keyboard, something that I'm admittedly not supposed to do, and I forwarded the footage up to the time that I had confronted him. The footage played and we were watched where I had confronted the guy and he took off. I then switched the cameras to the chemical and pharmacy aisles where I kept losing him. This, however, is where things somehow got even weirder. Not only did the guy just basically poof out of existence on camera, but that was also where the footage across all feeds had ended, at 8:13 p.m. I tried forwarding further to show the fact that I had been trying to chase him 3 times now, but that was it. Everything had stopped at 8:13. But, I stammered, staring slack-jawed at the CCTV screen. What? Asked Frank. Why want to go any further? I chased the guy 3 different times. Christian, he began sighing. I think you've been working too many night shifts here. Oh, don't patronize me, Frank. I know what I saw. He held his hands up defensively. I kept mashing the forward button like a madman before I felt Frank's hand on my shoulder stopping me. Christy, honey, why don't you take an early night? I looked at him and he looked confused, though obviously not as much as me. I exchanged glances between him and the monitor. But I'm telling you, Christy, he said, cutting me off, giving me a look that told me I wasn't going to make my case any more believable by continuing to push it. I sighed then, slumping my shoulders and stepping away from the panel. Go home, Christy, seriously, you've been working too hard. I nodded, grabbing at my purse and jacket. I'll tell Jimmy that you got sick or had a family emergency or something. Me and Harold will finish off the night." I nodded my head sullenly. If I'm gonna be perfectly honest, I likely wouldn't have minded the early pass to go home. He had a point for one thing about me working a lot of night shifts. He and I both knew Jimmy, the manager himself, probably would have told me the exact same thing in this instance. Another thing was that part of me wondered if maybe Frank was right, that maybe I really was just suffering from overexhaustion. But of course, at the same time, I knew dang well that I wasn't. Something funky was going on here, and for some reason, it wasn't being picked up by Frank or even the cameras. Unfortunately, with no way of actually being able to prove this, I had no choice but to do as Frank said and punch the clock for the night. Frank and I walked out of the office, and he split off to the right where he had met me at before, toward the pet aisle, while I went back toward the front. As I was trudging dejectedly to the counter to the time clock, I saw something that made me freeze and do a double take. Harold wasn't at the counter. I ran over to look for him, thinking maybe he had ducked down behind it or something, but nope, nothing. "Harold," I called out. Nothing. I buzzed my radio. "Harold, where are you?" Nothing. "Harold, where are you? You're supposed to be watching me." I stopped. I almost didn't catch it. It was almost a split-second thing that, had I not looked up right then when I had, frantically looking for Harold, I would have missed it. It was the guy again, walking hurriedly past the counter towards electronics. He hadn't made it further than maybe the other end of the front counter before I had zipped out from around and ran for him. "Hey you," I called, and he didn't stop. He was about to keep walking when I darted for him, roughly grabbing his shoulder. "Hey, I'm talking to you." I got no further though when I started to feel something tingling in my body. A strange, almost synthetic sort of a supersonic vibration shooting through my hand that traveled all the way up to my arm. This vibration then quickly became a sort of stinging sensation that screamed all throughout my body, inside and out. My entire body, skin, muscles, organs and all felt like it was being liquefied. The process was excruciatingly painful, yet when I tried to scream it felt that much more like my body was a piece of paper that was being torn in half. I did scream though, and it seemed to echo as if I were in a tunnel or something. Well, sort of. It's confusing, and believe me that my head hurts even now writing about it here. But I guess the best way to describe it is to imagine screaming into a tunnel, like I had mentioned before. But that tunnel then somehow splits itself in every direction, both possible and impossible, with the sound still traveling through each of them endlessly as they do so. And then imagine that. Not only do the tunnels not stop dividing in all directions, but the sounds within them start to then distort in every way, both imaginable and unimaginable, all at the same time. And you hear them all at the same time. I started to then see these sort of tunnels, I guess you could call them. They were these clear, almost jelly-looking funnels that twisted and wriggled as they constantly split apart within this dark expanse. I looked around, heart frozen in my chest. What was any of this? Where did it come from? And how did it even get here? Were questions that I couldn't begin to muster any kind of willpower to try to ask even myself. I watched as more of the tunnels diverged, each one making my scream sound less and less like me, less and less human in fact. I then looked down at my body. I was unharmed, despite being near certain that I had taken at least 1,000 fire pokers simultaneously, all over my body multiple times. When I went to move my hand, however, something even weirder had happened. Similar to the way that my screaming had produced all these different tunnels, the movement of my hand had produced tunnels as well. This time though, I saw me inside of them. Each new and diverting tunnel had a version of me, bringing my hands up to my face and widening my eyes in pure shock. And just like the ones with the screams, these two appeared to have these images of me distort more and more with each new division. Holy mother of... My frantic train of thoughts was further derailed when I then began to hear that very same thought. Yes, I said it. I heard my thought the same way that I heard the scream and saw the action with my hands. The same exact effect happened with my thoughts too. Then from somewhere in the vast mix of nothing and everything around me, I could hear this deep, baritone voice blast out, cutting through somehow all of the other noises from the tunnels around me. "Concentrate," the voice said. "Concentrate?" I cried out, hysterical by this point. Like the scream, this too was painful to do, causing me to scream again. Both sounds then joined the never-ending, ever-reaching junction of tunnels around me. "Concentrate, Christy," it replied. "How do they know my name? Who is this?" More tunnels formed, each one distorting the internal questions, some morphing them into different languages and others into not even languages at all, rather mumbles and grunts. "Concentrate on what?" I cried out painfully again. "What is this? Where am I?" "Concentrate," it bellowed. "As long as you continue to panic, you will only create more divisions." "Divisions? What are you talking about?" "Look in front of you." I did. "What you're seeing are the microscopic divisions in time itself. With each movement, action, or thought that you make, more divisions will occur, allowing for every possible way for said action, movement, or thought to be perceived." This was obviously the point where I learned the most unabridged, rawest version of words like confused, lost, flabbergasted, and baffled. Being honest, after this experience, I actually spent time trying to actually invent a new word for such a thought or feeling. The thing is, I kind of knew it then too. Such would just never accurately capture what it really was that I felt in that very moment. Lost in whatever bizarro limbo or dimension that I was in. What am I supposed to concentrate on? "Where you were before all this," bellowed the voice, probably having heard my thoughts as another tunnel, or I guess division was created from them. "What, you mean like the store?" "If that was where you were before you breached, then yes." "Breached?" I asked, feeling no more knowledgeable than I had last time. I don't. "Just concentrate and you can re-enter your normal plane." I stood there. I didn't know how I could concentrate on anything. For one thing, I had a hard enough time doing that without whatever the heck all this was going on around me. Another thing, I couldn't even think without literally hearing my own thoughts get jumbled up until they aren't even recognizable. And then there's the fact that I just didn't understand what was going on. "You're not concentrating," chastised the voice. I can't." I closed my eyes and covered my ears. I can't, there's too much." "You can do it, Christy. You must, or else you'll continue to divide within here until you've atrophied into nothing." "What?" I cried. That one, I believe, rang out the loudest and created more divisions than most, or all of the others before it. This, of course, meant that it was much more impossible to focus or concentrate on a thing. "You must clear your mind, concentrating on where you were before and what led you to this moment." My breathing was panicked, my heart on the brink of just giving the heck out by that point. Not only did I not know who the heck was talking to me or what was going on, how the heck did I know that what they were talking about would even work? They said if I didn't though, that I would be done for. I closed my eyes again and took a deep breath. Focus on where I was before, they said. What was I doing before? Where was I before? I strained to remember, but it was then that I began to feel the draining sensation spreading throughout my body. It wasn't painful per se, but rather, it felt as though something was being taken out of me, the feeling of fading away, atrophying. I was being erased. Concentrate. You panic now and you're done. Focus on where I was before. But where was I? The store. I was in the store. And what was I doing there? My mind felt overheated, like a computer chip about to fry. Still though, I kept my eyes shut tight. I tried to think about what exactly it was that I was doing in the store. I remembered that I was. The time clock. I was about to clock out for the night. Why though? Because Frank said that I needed to. Said that I had been working too hard. And what led you to that though? You really ought to switch to decaf, I said aloud unwittingly. I opened my eyes to see the division cease moving around in the black void. I could hear the sound of my voice trying to distort itself the way the others before had it, but seemingly was stuck or caught by something. From there, my memory of moments before flooded back to me, seemingly causing the distortions to go abruptly silent. The divisions twisted and knotted together before forming this bright ball in the center of the void. You've almost done it. Concentrate on the very moment that led you here. Frank said to switch to decaf. Why did he feel the need to say that? Well, I kept running into him in front of the office. But what kept bringing me there? Because I kept chasing and then it hit me. The guy in the black hoodie. I kept running into Frank because I was chasing the guy in the hoodie who kept coming into the store and disappearing. My eyes opened, then to see a glowing white sphere. The light from it wasn't so much bright though, as it was spectral. It was glowing, yet I could look directly at it without it hurting my eyes at all. Everything was quiet. Everything was still. I brought my hands to my face again. I screamed and shouted again, and nothing happened. Hey, I called out. While I could see no one else was around me in the void that I was in, I still kind of half expected the voice from before to reply somehow. Ironically enough, it still caught me a bit off guard when it actually did. The breach is being sealed, it thundered. Okay, I stuttered. I shook my head. So okay, can you tell me what the heck is going on? I mean, I was just about to get off work when... Calm yourself, it interjected. I took a deep breath while it continued. You stumbled into what is known to very, very few as a breach. A shift in the tapestry of time and dimension. And this was the point in which both my mind and heart seemed to just freeze at the same time. I still managed to remember what it was that he actually had said to me. But how would I know if I made a lick of sense to me, either back then or now? Time, you may or may not know, is a straight line. What most won't realize is that it too has dimensions to it. It's as three-dimensional as the Earth itself. This, however, is something that's not typically seen by the ordinary eye. Also, like the crust of Earth, time itself occasionally undergoes its own seismic shifts. When this happens, cracks will form, and on occasions, individuals like yourself end up slipping through these cracks and causing a breach to form. Okay, I replied hesitantly. So then, how is this shift or whatever caused? I mean, there's a way to prevent them or predict them, right? Well, let me answer that with my own question. Can you prevent or determine the cause of an earthquake? No, I guess not. Other than when something big causes the tectonic plates to shift, like construction equipment or something, and we have seismographs to at least tell us when it happens. This is true, but now take that and apply it to this. Time is as natural a force as the elements. Therefore, it too undergoes its own processes that are beyond the abilities of mortal beings to control. I began to feel dizzy again. My vision on the orb blurred a bit. That, it continued not noticing me, or at least not seeming to, is why when you moved, it made sounds or thought, the divisions were created. Further rips in the fabric of reality. It has that effect on those that cause a breach. It almost took you too, as it has many others. Others? My tongue began to go numb. Well, yes, others who didn't make it out of the breach. Much like the soul that you were chasing earlier. And it would seem that it's made its mark on you as well. What? Don't. You need to conserve what you have. The more energy you expend, the more of yourself you lose here in the breach. You've managed to calm it, but the shift is still in effect. Unfortunately, the effects it's already had on you are irreversible. But you can still come out of this with the rest of yourself intact. What do I have to do? With each passing second, I felt like my body was having all of its innards sucked out through a straw or something. Come forward and step into the orb, the sealed time breach. You'll be returned to the point that you were when you slipped through the shift. I wanted to ask more questions, obviously, but I knew at the same time that it was right. Who or whatever it was a god, I guess. The longer I lingered in the void, the more of myself I continued to lose. With no other alternative, I went forward into the orb. As soon as my hand broke through, I saw for a split second the front of the store before a flash of white light had splashed across my eyes. This time, I did actually end up having to shield my eyes. In fact, this time it actually felt like my eyes were still burning, even after I had closed them as tightly as I could. Luckily, this only lasted about 2 or 3 seconds before I was able to open my eyes again to see that I was in front of the electronics aisle again. I looked around. The store looked normal enough. I reached out and felt along the countertop of my register. It was solid, metallic, just like usual. I began to walk around. Everything was quiet as it had been before, save for the god-awful music that was playing over the radio. My legs were wobbly. I almost fell, managing to catch myself on the countertop. I stumbled, then between the pharmacy and the chemical aisles. Everything looked fine. Everything was quiet, and everything was normal. I was back. I was startled again when I felt a hand rest on my shoulder from behind me. I snapped around to find Frank, and this time when I reared back, it was a bit delayed. "Hey Christy, it's just me. It's time to close up." My face went from one of exhausted alarm to one of confusion. Seeing this, Frank held up his watch. It read 10:05. Harold came down from the pet aisle and walked past us to the office. "Closing time?" I slurred. He raised his eyebrows at me. "Yeah," he said nervously. "You okay? You look pale." I didn't respond. Apparently, whatever look I had on my face spoke enough for me because the next thing I knew, he was telling me to take a couple of days off like he had before. This time, I accepted that invitation with no rebuttal, nor would I have challenged it if I did have the energy to speak. It was during my little vacation from work that I was taken by my folks to see a neurologist. They ran tests on me extensively too, but in a few weeks they still came back with the results that there was nothing wrong. When asked about my sudden lapse in energy or my difficulty in being able to speak, they had suggested a sudden onset of narcolepsy. They told me the best thing to help was a healthy diet, plenty of rest, and to not overexert myself. As you can imagine, none of that helped, then or now. I know of course why they don't too. Whatever happened in that time shift or whatever, the breach, it's irreversible. It's all part of my being that were distorted and erased. In spite of all of this, my story does get a little better. I went back to work a few weeks later with my time with the neurologist even allowing for paid medical leave, where I was assigned to limited register duty, basically meaning that all I would have to do is stand at the register and look pretty. As well as this, I was granted extra break periods to not overexhaust myself. My studies had become a challenge for me, but I still managed to pass the semester with a decent enough average. This was last year though. I still have trouble trying to do a whole lot physically. At times it feels like I've aged a lot more than I should have, possibly literally. A few months later, I started noticing wrinkles and liver spots in certain places when I looked in the mirror. Over time, I noticed more and more of them progressively. Let's say this, that when the incident had happened, I was 27, looking more like 19 or 20. Now I'm 28, looking closer to 38. My folks, and yes, I'm still with them, think that it may be some sort of stress. The thing is, I'm not stressed. I mean, things are even easier for me now than what they had ever been, both at work as well as with classes. No, it's not stress. It was one shift. The one night shift that almost wouldn't end, and one that almost ended me.